I got accused of breaking a law I'd never heard of. My coffee still hot in my hand, and half the ridge gathered like they'd scored front-row seats to my humiliation. And a woman in a neon vest told me my father's cabin was an unsafe structure that would be cleared like she was scraping gum off her shoe. That's the hook life used on me. The forest was in that soft hour where dew slides off needles and a creek hums under the brush. Then the convoy crawled up. My private trail. Doors swung. Boots hit dirt. Clipboards flashed. And this woman, Marla Pierce, acting director of the Sawmill Ridge Improvement Committee, announced that my home fell under their influence zone. Influence zone. You hear that? And you know somebody brought a thesaurus to a land grab. I asked for specifics. Her guy coughed up a handful of codes like he was reading lottery numbers. A notice got slapped against my porch post with a stamp that sounded like a gavel. Neighbors drifted closer with their phones held low, and you could feel the air begging me to crack. I set my mug down, walked inside, and carried out the shotgun that has lived by the door since my dad taught me respect. Before he taught me recoil, I didn't rack it, didn't raise it, just leaned it against the rail like a book. You open when words stop working, and the moment bent. The loud one took a step back on a shaky heel. Marla's jaw twitched. Nobody wanted to test which language we were speaking now. "We'll be back with real authority," she hissed, and the trucks chewed gravel out of here like angry bees. When the dust settled, I spotted a folder half buried by the steps. Dark cover, muddy corners, title clean as a warning, Langley Ridge Partners. Phase 1. Inside were maps that treated the hills like graph paper villas, stamped over wildflower slopes. A turquoise pool, painted on top of a meadow, I learned to whistle in, and dead center of a new road sat my cabin, exit in red, like a stain. If this post falls, the forest burns. That's what my dad told me this summer. Lightning turned the ridge into a fuse, and I heard him like he was standing behind me. Not because the cabin is magic, but because it's a line. You hold a line, and the world behind it lives. The next morning, a green truck with a fresh logo rolled out of the fog. 2 men in crisp uniforms stepped down, like they owned silence. Spark Risk 1 said, "Vacate today." He waved a sheet with a seal. So perfect it felt like it was trying too hard, and my heart hammered. But my brain did what my dad trained it to do. Look close. Always look close. The green was a hair off the seal, sat a hair crooked. The citation font didn't match the body little things, but lies fray at the edges. "Pop quiz," I said. "What's red tag S7 in the wildfire manual off the top?" He blinked. His buddy stared into the trees like he'd spotted philosophy, and I offered the answer anyone real would know: flammable liquid storage. And you could feel the crowd at the trailhead lean in like birds, turning in the same breath. "Let us see that seal." Someone said. The paper shook. The men folded. The truck vanished back into the fog, but doubt doesn't evaporate as neatly as taillights. And that week, I learned how fast good people choose less trouble over more truth. Trash skipped my address, while 3 houses on either side were neat and empty. A white envelope in my mailbox hummed with words like community integrity and failure to comply. The county site listed my dock as a shared amenity. Photos of my shoreline brightened like brochure candy, and I sat at my dad's old table at 1 a.m., cross-checking databases, eyes burning, finding file numbers that didn't exist 8 weeks ago, a paper universe being built brick by phony brick while I slept. So I pulled down the trunk that smells like old smoke, cracked my dad's field notebooks, and laid out his careful radio logs, stamped dispatch copies, the old call sign printed like grocery items, Firewatch post of record watershed coordinates pinned to a map in my head. Then I put those beside the glossy resort plans and felt weight settle where panic had been. Because facts sit heavy. Lies try to float. At the Grange that night, Marla painted progress like a sunrise. Pools, rec centers, jobs for our kids, pride in our zip code. And folks clapped because pride is cheap at retail. When they gave me the floor, I didn't try to be a hero. I just set the journals down and told the simple thing. This place isn't a shack, it's a watch. Before your phone pinged a warning, a neighbor on this porch called wind shifts into a radio, and the ink says so. A few snorts, Marla shaped the word forgery in her mouth, like she enjoyed the taste. And then Mrs. Whitaker, knuckles like roots, eyes like lightning, stood up and said she poured coffee for firefighters on my porch in '89. I heard the radio crackle that call sign, she said, and the room's temperature changed 3 degrees. That should have been our turn, but the twist came with smoke. 3 days later, the sky blushed. The wrong color sirens don't reach us fast. So our legs did, and as we ran, a voice behind me hissed that I'd lit it to prove a point, waving a flyer like scripture. You know what I mean? Yeah, that happened. I didn't waste breath on a courtroom in a parking lot. I grabbed shovels and my father's maps, and we hustled up toward Heat's country, where the air shoves back and the ground tastes like pennies. I spread the maps in the dust and jabbed the line where the underground seep threads through basalt dig here. If you want Glass Creek flowing in August, dig here. If you want the cottonwoods alive, if the cabin goes, this line dies. This isn't drama, it's plumbing. And the same neighbors who wouldn't meet my eyes last week formed a bucket chain like they'd practiced it at home. Nina from the clerk's office turned into an air traffic controller with a manila folder. Kids ran water to hands that wouldn't stop swinging misses. Whitaker sat like a general counting gusts duke. Marla's notice stapler in a ball cap tried to turn it back into my fault. And the fire threw a tongue to within 10 feet of his boots. And that ended. The speech we cut. Line burned back. Soaked edges. Teeth went black with smoke, and by dusk the ridge hissed into steam. Faces smeared with ash looked at me, not like a problem, but like a guy saying something they could finally hear. And while we fought it, Marla was nowhere. Folks noticed that. Mattered. The night after Nina came to my porch with an envelope that felt heavier than paper, shouldn't have this, she whispered. But after the fire, I couldn't sleep inside were receipts and memos that smelled like arrogance. Kickbacks routed through friendly pockets. Donations that found private accounts. A draft to classify parcels as amenities via a temporary committee that looked a lot like the one Marla invented. And the next Grange meeting had that brittle hush of people bracing for the thing you can't unknow. Marla did her sunrise again. Nina slid the envelope onto the table like a winning card. I read the first letter, then the second. You could hear the oxygen change. Marla laughed. The wrong laugh. Fabrications, she said. He'll print anything to keep his little shack. And Duke started sweating through his collar like honesty had sprung a leak. Someone asked if he wore the fake uniform, and he tried to say no, but the word got stuck. She told me it was legal theater. He muttered, "Gare him," and the rest fold the fire thing would be useful. That's not a pin, that's a detonation. The room went hot. Questions slapped from every corner. Marla pointed at me and screamed about the shotgun, like she could push me across the floor with her finger, and I owned it plain. I set it on a rail. It's a line it never left safe. I won't apologize for a boundary. And Mrs. Whitaker cracked the table with her palm. "Stop changing the subject," she said, and the tide turned without music or speeches, just a room choosing which voice to believe when stories collide. I wish that tied the bow, but people who build little empires don't surrender in the parking lot. 2 nights later, we were clearing brush by lantern kids, drawing chalk maps on the porch pine, finally in the air again, and Marla blew in like weather hair, wild eyes, glassy, slapping a stack of papers on my table. Squatter fraud. "You leave now," and I took the shotgun down, set it beside her stack like a bookend. I said, "Let's look." Nina raised the lantern. 5 seconds was all it took. Wrong seal, off-center. 2 fonts, fighting on 1 sentence a date that landed on the wrong weekday. Lies, forget their own notes. The room didn't boo. It leaned away. The way humans take their eyes. Back when they're done giving them. Marla stared at my dad's open journal, where he'd written in careful letters, "Glass Creek Seep. Anchor Point must never be sold." She read the word never, and it looked like it finally weighed what it meant. Then she smiled. The kind that isn't shoved the papers and left. After that, the law started its slow machine. Complaints filed. A state investigator made copies. A cousin on a board remembered a conflict. The committee's website disappeared like a tent after a carnival. Duke quit stapling anything but his mouth, and we still had black slopes to reseed and charred limb piles to haul, and work stitched people together better than any opinion piece ever will. The cabin went back to what my dad promised, a meeting place that watches. The shotgun stayed on the wall where it belongs. Folks nod at it, like they nod at a fire extinguisher. Not because they want to use it, because they understand what it means. If you want a fairy tale, I can't sell you one. What I've got is a messy win. You hold every day. The cabin stands. The creek sings under the roots, hits track mud on the porch, and get yelled at the town. Learned how easy it is to sell progress when you draw it in warm colors, and how brave it is to say no to a story that flatters you. Sometimes at last light. I sit out there and talk to my dad like a fool. I tell him Mrs. Whitaker's palm on that table was the loudest sound I ever heard. I tell him Nina's laugh came back. Once the worst part was over, I tell him I brought his old radio out when the wind kicked high and listened to static like my hands remembered the weight without asking. And I also tell him I saw headlights on the far ridge, lingering where you can see my roof through the pines. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was someone checking whether the line still holds, because that's the thing about lines. You draw them, and then you stand there. So tell me straight, was I right to set that gun on the rail as a boundary, or did that cross yours? Is progress just profit? Dressed in Sunday clothes, when the people pushing it write the rules? Where do you put the line between a community's future and one person's home? Drop your take in the comments. Argue with me if you need to, and if you've stood up to a system that treated you like a speed bump. Tell that story here, so somebody else learns how to hold their ground.